The crate that arrived at Recklin looked like it had been built to ship a cathedral. For olive drab panels wore the chalk scrawl of the American depot that had once owned them. The crate smelled of ocean, oil, and a kind of stubborn certainty. Men in gray overalls pried the lid, and the hangar filled with sunlight and dust as a great curved edge appeared, then rivets like constellations, then a blade-tedious propeller whose hub was painted with a chipped red band. Thunderbolt, someone said, and the word didn't sound like a name so much as weather. Lieutenant Joachim Falk moved closer, notebook under arm, pencil behind ear. He'd flown everything the test center could put under him. BF-109s with their nervous, knife-edged hearts, FW-190s that rolled like thoughts, a Mustang A model that came to them wounded and proud, even a Spitfire whose wing felt like a handshake from an old enemy. But this was different. This was not a fighter so much as a promise cast in aluminum. The P-47. They set it down on blocks and pulled back the canvas. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 radial sat like a fist, with pipes running back through the belly where the turbocharger slept, a metal maze that seemed to bend the idea of an engine into a cathedral organ. The nose was blunt. The fuselage was a barrel. It was ugly the way a safe is ugly. Form has surrendered to function and become, by accident, beautiful. Americans build for the field, murmured Oberingenieur Krauss, the chief engineer, as he ran a hand along the quick-release cowl fasteners. Labels and stenciled English League honesty pointed where lines went, what voltage fed what box. No romance, only procedure. Falk wrote, quick change panels. Wiring looms tagged. Tools, simple. Logic, embarrassingly clear. He did not add the thing he was thinking. Our airplanes are dualists. This one is a factory worker with fists like anvils. The crew brought its wounds with it. The right aileron bore holes. A German 20mm shell had drawn a knuckle of torn metal out of the left wing. But the P-47 seemed not to mind. It was like an ox with a scar. Fuel? Falk asked. Captured 100/130 barrels, Krauss said. See, 3 isn't enough for that turbo. We'll keep it gentle. For now. Falk nodded. He understood the bargain. The Americans had built an airplane around a turbo supercharger that inhaled altitude and exhaled horsepower. Germans had chosen the artist's way. Inline engines with direct drive, superchargers perched like cats. The Thunderbolt carried a basement of plumbing, cooling, control doors, and wastegates. It weighed as much as a small past. He opened the cockpit. The canopy slid with a clunk that sounded like a good door closing in a good house. Inside, a seat that didn't pinch, armor that didn't apologize, a panel where switches lined up like soldiers but wore cheerful English tags. Pitot heat, gun heat, boost. A thick-framed reflector sight stared back. The oxygen plumbing looked redundant enough to offend an engineer of elegance, but to delight a pilot who liked breathing. There was even a socket labeled heated suit. You see, Krauss said, peering over the sill. Heaters for the man. The machine carries the human like cargo. Or like a king, Falk said, almost gently. They signed the papers, the forms with black eagles at the top and small spaces below for liability that no one but widows read. In the flight shack, the coffee was strong enough to forgive, and the barograph man shook his head at the thought of logging this monster's climb. If it climbs at all, the man said, trying for wit. It will, Falk answered. Americans build factories that fly. They flew it the way you walk into a cold lake, slowly, with respect, daring not to gasp. The engine started on the first twist of inertia and the second jab of primer, coughing once like an old smoker, then settling into a radial's baritone that filled the hangar doors and went out into the pine trees to tell the crows a story. On taxi, it felt heavy and honest. The tail rose reluctantly, then dutifully. Falk lined up on the Recklin runway, checked that the cowl flaps were where the temperature and hope agreed, swept a look across the forest of gauges, oil pressure green, manifold pressure ready to send, turbine inlet temp conservative, and pushed. The Thunderbolt did not leap, it gathered. It did not sprint. It took possession of the ground until the ground got tired and let go. "Gear up," he said aloud out of habit, and the wheels tucked with a rumble like furniture being moved in a downstairs flat. At 3,000 meters, he began to understand what this airplane did to air. The turbo woke like a beast turning over in its den. The manifold needle held, as if by a second, invisible throttle. Where German fighters panted as the air thinned, the Thunderbolt got greedy. The R-2800's song deepened, and the airplane that had been stolid became suddenly lighter, as if it had remembered something about itself that the ground had been hiding. He tried to roll. Not quick at low speed. There was mass. There was forgiveness. But at high speed, the aileron stayed honest where other wings went stubborn. He pulled hard to see where the black would come, and it came predictably gray to black like a curtain in a theater. He relaxed and laughed under the mask. He had flown thoroughbreds. This was a draft horse that had learned to dance. Controls at 550 kilometers per hour IS remain, and here a technical term may be used civilized. He told the tape recorder that he kept strapped against the instrument combing with a leather band. The little needle on the voice level trembled. Kraus back on the ground would replay the wax and tell the story to men with pencils. Falk pressed the nose and let the airplane fall. Diving was where the P-47 was rumored to live. The airframe shuddered the way a bridge shudders under a heavy truck. The needle ran out of numbers. The world streamlined itself into something very simple. The horizon, the throttle, the trembling joy at your spine when old fears find new respect. He pulled. The oxygen hissed. The wings hummed at a frequency that made your teeth confess their sins. But the elevator didn't go on strike. The ailerons didn't turn into crowbars. It came out of the dive with a shrug, like a linebacker taking a hill of children on a sled. He spoke softly into the recorder. "Do not chase this airplane down. Do not follow it down. You will bury your own airplane first." He tried to zoom, climb off the dive, pointing the big nose up until the needles sagged. It didn't leap like a 109, but it kept going. Momentum, energy, the American word that sounded like a sermon, lived here. German fighters fought like fencers. This thing fought like a man with a sledge and long lungs. At 7,000 meters, a height where FW-190s became grumpy and 109s were brave but thin, the P-47 was at home. The turbo's door clicked and hissed. Manifold pressure held like a faith that refused evidence. He felt the way he had felt on a winter night as a boy, when he discovered that the old iron stove in his grandmother's kitchen grew hotter the longer the snow fell. "Note," he said, "high-altitude dominance is not rumor. Above 7 kilometers, the Thunderbolt has authority." He tested the stall. Honest, a buffet first, and then a docile nod. He fired the guns on a cleared range. 8.50 caliber Brownings whose chorus shook the airplane in a way that threatened your soul, but not your aim. The tracers were a garden path. Imagine bringing that down against a line of Ju 88s or a lone 190. Imagine head-on. He wrote, "Do not oblige him head-on. You are not armored to the heart the way he is." He looked at the armor plate behind his head. He tapped it. He imagined what 8 heavy machine guns would do to the front of a Messerschmitt. He did not have to imagine very long. On the 4th flight, he experimented with cooling doors and the crude theology of managing heat and drag. The cockpit warmed your toes instead of freezing them. The canopy vented the way a building vents. He realized, grudgingly, that the airplane had been designed not by a genius in a studio, but by a committee that had answered questionnaires from men with frostbitten fingers. Kraus met him at the wing with a clipboard and the hunger he always had for facts that made pride uncomfortable. "Well," Falk looked back at the size of the thing. He placed a palm flat against the fuselage skin as if feeling a horse's breath. "It dies like a church bell," he said. "It climbs like a lie that you want to believe. It fights at a height we don't like to fight. And it refuses to die the way we are accustomed to killing." Kraus waited, pencil above paper. It's not art. It's industry, Fox said finally. And industry is beating us. They built a syllabus. The Zirkus boys would take the P-47 and tour operational fields, letting squadrons see the beast up close, letting pilots touch the rivets, and feel the shame and relief of knowing your enemy has good ideas. Falk wrote in block letters that any tired man could read. Do not dive after Thunderbolt. He will be faster, deeper, and safer longer. Break away up while you still have wing. Force him low and slow if you can. When he slows, he is heavy. Scissors at low altitude, then go vertical if you're in a 109 and have room. Above 6 to 7 kilometers, avoid turning engagements. He will retain power, you will not. Do not accept head-on fights. 8 heavy guns will turn your cockpit to tin rain. Hit and leave. If you stay to finish, he will trade altitude for freedom and buy both. He added things that were not tactics, but respect. The P-47's self-sealing tanks did their work. Armor behind the pilot and around the oil cooler saved lives. Radio sets were clear and stubborn. The electrics were wired for men, not for poets. But what changes everything? Asked Hauptmann Lersner, an operations man with a colonel's skepticism and a sergeant's appetite. Falk looked past him at the Thunderbolt, where Kraus was explaining to an electrician how the turbo wastegate should move under hand pressure. Outside, the pine trees decorated themselves with wind. It changes this, Falk said, tapping his temple. Our ideas about how a fight is allowed to go. He drew on the blackboard. A 190 here, an arc, a P-47 there, a line. We want a duel of talent. He wants a duel of energy. Our boys have been diving after Americans out of pride. Pride is a kind of gravity. The P-47 has better gravity. The room laughed because the joke was true. Men remember truths better when they laugh while swallowing them. In late May, they staged the demonstration. A staffel of 109 GS came in to watch, their noses still stained with the exhaust of hurried sorties. The pilots stood with crossed arms, boots in dust, skepticism on faces that had earned it honestly by not dying. Falk took the Thunderbolt up with a friendly 109 as the foil. Cameras rolled. They performed a sequence like theater. Head-on pass. Falk dared. The 109 flinched. Sustained climb. The 109 higher at first. The P-47 catching breath and holding where the 109 began to pant. A dive escape. 109 could not follow without compressibility and courage signing a bad mortgage. Then Falk killed the smoke and eased down to the line, wheels out, a parade pass so the men could see the armor glass, the 8 muzzles, the turbo's belly with its ducting that looked like an iron intestine. When he cut the mixture, the applause was not for him. It was for the knowledge. He saw it pass from man to man, the permission to change habits. The Luftwaffe had trained artists. The war now demanded accountants of altitude and speed. Back in the shack, Lersner made the change official. New bulletin to all fighter units, he said, smoothing the paper. Amend tactics against heavy American fighters, Thunderbolt primarily. Replace pursue diving with break high after 2 seconds of follow. Replace turn at altitude with extend and climb. Re-engage with energy advantage. He cleared his throat. Add, avoid vanity. Is that a tactical term? Kraus asked, deadpan. It is now, Lersner said. Falk walked back out to the airplane as evening stole the edges from things. A mechanic named Ernst wiped bugs off the leading edge with the tenderness of a man polishing a headstone. Do we respect it or fear it, Herr Lieutenant? Ernst asked without looking up. Both, Falk said. The trick is to respect it in the briefing and fear it only in the air. He scribbled another line in the notebook that had become more prayer than notes. The P-47 is not invincible, but it is not insulted by our usual weapons. On the 7th day of tests, something happened that put teeth into theory. A pair of P-47s from a high-altitude sweep were reported by radar sneaking along a stacked column of flak bursts that looked like a twisted beanstalk in the sky. Lursner, with the reflex of a man who has lived by deciding, sent two 109s to bounce them and told Falk, "Take the captured bird up. I want film. I want proof." Falk went because saying yes to airplanes was how he had gotten here. He lifted the Thunderbolt, kept it low until the trees loved him, then pulled into the sky with the NCO's belief in labor. The radio was crisp. The American set was shamelessly good, their vowels cut through static like knives through stale bread. He found the 109s first, specks turning into bees, diving on something bright in the haze. "Break high," he barked in the squadron frequency out of habit. 109 did. The other followed the Thunderbolt down like a younger brother chasing a dare. The American jinked, showed a wing, then poured on in the dive in a way that made Falk's stomach feel like an empty drawer. The German pilot found compressibility where the textbooks kept it. His airplane trembled, his control froze, he blacked to gray. Falk saw it all from above, his hands moving on controls that were not his habit and yet felt like habit now. He mashed the mic, "Break high, break high." But the pilot below was on the religion of pursuit. The P-47 pulled out long and clean and came up the other side like a trout. Falk rolled the captured Thunderbolt, paced the American. For a handful of seconds time pretended to stop, and two P-47s flew next to each other, the hunted and the hunter, but both heavy, both honest, both carrying the weather of a continent under their paint. The American pilot turned his helmeted head. Falk saw the surprise, then something like recognition, then a shrug. War had collected another coincidence to laugh about later. The American wagged his wings once. Whether in greeting or contempt is a question for a different religion, and then bored away, pouring altitude into speed the way a bookkeeper pours numbers into columns. He was gone before Falk's conscience could finish writing a sentence. When they landed, Lursner didn't shout. He didn't need to. The shaken 109 pilot, pale as paste, did the shouting for him without words. "We put it on paper tonight," Lursner said to Falk in the dusk. "We make the habit official. No more pride dives. We teach in the mess if we must. What we discovered," Falk said quietly, "will save more of our own than it kills of theirs." "That," Lursner answered, "is what changed everything means." The final round of tests probed the parts of war not measured in knots. They logged how fast a line crew could change a gun tray. Minutes, because the Americans had built the guns into removable panels like drawers. They checked how the self-sealing tanks swelled when hit. They shot a P-47's wing with a 13 millimeters and photographed the way the rubber drank the leak like a fist closing. They measured the radio range, the stubborn clarity that made German sets sound like whispers. Krauss brought a scale to the cockpit and weighed human convenience. The canopy rails that did not bind. The seat that let you sit for hours without beginning to hate your kidneys. The belly duct labyrinth that was ugly until you considered that at 8 kilometers it was prosperity. In a margin of the report, Falk wrote the one sentence he would have carved into wood if the war allowed wood for anything but burning. He is heavy on the ground, so he could be light in the sky. He expected the phrase to be red-penciled by a colonel who liked elevating language only when it praised the fatherland. Instead, Lursner underlined it and sent it on. When the envelope left Recklin, carried by a dispatch rider who smelled of damp leather and luck, Falk stood in the hangar door and watched the road vanish into its own dust. A summer storm was pulling itself together in the west. The Thunderbolt sat behind him, tied down and asleep, a borrowed god that had told him honestly who it was and what it wanted. He felt tired in a way that was not only physical. He felt that he had met, in aluminum and pipe and wire, the story of his enemy's civilization. He put a hand on the P-47's skin and, without realizing, said thank you in a language the airplane didn't need to understand. Down the row, a canvas-covered shape shivered in the gust. Under that canvas, Krauss had told him, was the next problem The next confession from a capture machine. At P-51 with laminar wings, another sermon in metal. There'd be more tests, more notebooks, more rewritten tactics. The war was a school that rewarded the fast learners and buried the proud. Falk closed his book, dated the page, and wrote a title for tomorrow's lesson. Part 2. The debrief that broke the mess hall. The storm rolled in like a closing argument. A bruise of cloud stacked over Recklin, layer upon layer, until the pine forest looked like black stubble under a steel helmet. Barometers fell with the helplessness of a man who has already told the truth and knows it will not help him. "Leave her tide," Kraus said, but he said it to the wind as much as to Falk. The P-47 squatted under its canvas like an animal that had learned patience. Ropes hummed. Rain arrived in rehearsals. First a spit, then a whisper, then a sheet. "Thunderbolt in a thunderstorm," Lersner said. "If the gods wrote jokes, they'd underline this." Falk touched the filled-in squares of the maintenance card hanging from the main gear. The canvas flapped against his shoulder and made him think of the capes men wore in old paintings of sieges. "We wanted to know how the turbo breathes dirty," he said. "Here it is, the dirtiest breath in the sky." Kraus, who loved machines the way some men love dogs, had arranged the trial with the fervor of a priest setting out candles. They would run the captured P-47 on the ground through the teeth of a storm, cowl flaps in various positions, intercooler doors staged, wastegate commanded and then permitted, measuring temperatures as if they were sins. If the Pratt and Whitney coughed, they would hear it. If the turbo swallowed water the way a child swallows a dare, they would write it down. They pulled the canvas. Rain hit metal the way applause hits a hall. Loud, then louder, because you can't control it. Ernst swung the prop through, then stepped back as Falk primed and hit the starter. Inertia whined. The radio came alive in hiccups, then in a rolling bass that you could feel between your ribs. Raindrops blew sideways in the prop wash, slanting like soldiers changing direction. Kraus crouched by the right wheel with a clipboard and a plastic bag and lifted his eyebrows when the turbo duck sighed, then growled. "Cowl 2 notches, intercooler mid, oil door 1, he shouted, and Falk moved the levers with a delicacy that would have offended a pianist but impressed a surgeon. Manifold pressure stayed obedient. The carburetor air temp needle climbed to a number that belonged to summer in Spain. Lightning tore open the western edge of the field and stitched it closed again. Thunder followed with bureaucratic delay. The P-47 didn't care. The electrics cared less. American wiring looms, overspecified, weatherproofed, mocked the rain. The radio, on a frequency no one else at the field used, stayed clean. "We could brief a mission in this," Lersner said from under his coat. He did not add how many briefings had been ruined by German sets that were opera singers in concert halls and beggars in the street. After 15 minutes of wet arithmetic, Kraus straightened and shook his head like a dog. "That's enough," he said. "The machine is telling us. If you have electricity and courage, you have weather." "What does that change?" Lersner asked, but he already knew. The Jagdwaff had been lifting heavier and heavier, later and later, into skies that belonged to the enemy. If the enemy fought in storms the way he fought in clear, the escort would not be broken by cloud. You can no longer hide. "It changes the places we can run to," Fox said, and he didn't mean runways. The mess hall broke because of paper. The memo Lersner sent was brutal in its simplicity. Avoid vanity. Against P-47s, never pursue into prolonged dives. Recover high. Force low-speed fights on your ground. Deny head-on attacks. Exploit vertical when energy advantage exists. Do not be provoked into wastegate races you cannot win. He attached Fox's test report with the line that had made even Kraus go gentle. He is heavy on the ground, so he can be light in the sky. Somewhere beyond Recklin, on an overused aerodrome whose name had lost syllables to exhaustion, a Staffel captain read the words to his pilots between soup and cigarettes. "Avoid vanity," he said, pronouncing it like a foreign city. A boy, He was 19 with a policeman's mustache he had not yet earned, snorted. If we keep avoiding, what do we do? Wave. We choose, the captain said, surprising himself with the authority in his voice. We choose where we die, or who does. He pinned the memo to the board with a fork because the thumbtacks had been requisitioned. At another field, a veteran with heaven's own tally on his tail read the same lines and said nothing. He went to his tent and stared at a drawing of a woman he had not seen in a year. Later, he flew a sortie and did not follow a P-47 down. He came home angry at himself for fearing an enemy. He lived to be angrier the next day and the next. Vanity became a luxury he could afford to hate. In the Reckland mess, Fox stood when Lersner asked him to speak. The room had that overheated, underfed smell that all rooms have where men wait between the war and their next lesson. You know me, Fox began. You know I love our machines. I love them the way a man loves something that tried to kill him and was decent enough to fail. I'm not here to praise the Americans. I'm here to warn you against the American way of thinking. He built for the average to survive and for the tired to succeed. He designs procedures you can follow when your brain is soup. A laugh. It helped. The P-47 is a fist on a factory arm. It wins by energy and by the refusal to die. If you play its game, you will lose, not because you are worse pilots, but because you will be wrong pilots. Someone, an old 190 hand with oil under his nails and superstition in his pocket, asked the question Falk had been answering for a week. Can we kill it? Yes, Fox said. Make it do what it hates. Make it turn when slow. Make it climb when it has no speed, not when it is fat with it. Drag it down to our fences. And never, never let your pride follow it off a cliff. What if he follows us? Someone else asked. Then we teach him our lesson, Fox said, and the room liked that. He did not tell them about the moment of strange fraternity he had felt flying next to the American in the captured Thunderbolt. He did not tell them about the utilitarian compassion of a cockpit that warmed your toes and labeled your switches. He did not tell them that the airplane had made him think about nations the way you think about men, about their habits, their food, their way of telling jokes, their belief in instruction manuals. He kept that for himself. A war is not the place for poetry unless it is printed on a map. The field repair race came out of a dare. The mechanics played cards in the shelter of the wing and argued like theologians about the number of angels that could dance on a safety wire. Ernst had the idea. Ernst, who believed that a good day's work cleans your soul. 2 airplanes, he said, our 109 and the American Cow. We simulate a cannon hit to the right wing, guns jammed, oil leak pinched, radio swap. Which crew can return her to serviceable faster? Krauss pretended to be offended. We are not circus, he said, then drew up the rules of the circus himself. The starting pistol was not a pistol, but a wrench struck against a prop blade. They crippled both machines compassionately. They loosened a gun tray in the 109 and a gun drawer in the P-47. They cracked an oil line, fitting with restraint where restraint mattered. They pulled a radio from each and set it on a bench like a fish you meant to eat. At the clang, the German team attacked the 109 with the fury of men who have put these airplanes back together in fields made of mud. Panels off, screws into pockets, one bolt dropped, curse found, bolt back. The American team, German soldiers using American tools on an American airplane, worked like a kitchen where the chef has labeled the drawers. The P-47 shrugged its gun tray out like a desk giving up a file. The radio, an ugly, honest brick, slotted into its rack with a click that felt like victory in miniature. The oil line was a heartbreak, until Ernst grinned, held up a spare from the captured spares kit, also labeled, and threaded it with the speed of a man tightening his own belt. The 109's mechanics were beautiful, but they were artists. The P-47's mechanics were clerks of survival. The Thunderbolt won by minutes that felt like a doctrine. Krauss wrote the obvious on the chalkboard. Theirs, modules. Ours, objects. Then below that, as if it hurt him but needed saying, war favors modules. That, more than anything else the pilots had heard, changed how they looked at the enemy. Not the speed, not the guns, not the climb. The ease of being alive that the machine extended to the man who loved it. The day the doctrine had to be proved found them when the weather had just remembered the idea of summer. It came in with an alarm so ordinary that men did not stand up as if the floor were on fire. They stood up the way you stand up for a bell you have always answered. High fortresses, heavy escort, Lersner said, reading the plot like tea leaves he had learned to hate. We're thin today. The boys from the east won't make it. Falk was halfway to the door when Lersner's voice pinned him. Take the American, he said. Into combat, Krauss asked, the word doing strange things to his jaw. Into film, Lersner said. Into example. Falk did not argue. The war was now full of things he had never expected to be asked to do. He strapped in with the comfort he had learned, checked the cockpit like he was counting parts of himself he didn't want to forget, and rolled. At 2,000 meters, he could already see the stack. B-17s that looked like moving barns, and around them the shine of Mustangs and the bulk of P-47s. The flak over the assigned box was a dirty garden, black flowers that did not make wishes. A swarm of 109s went for the high escort and did that dance of courage and math that had become the Luftwaffe's signature sigh. Falk kept the Thunderbolt a step back, because filming chaos requires not to be its first guest. Then the dive happened, the old sin. A green 109, drawn by a Thunderbolt's insulting backside, went down hard. Falk heard himself on the radio, then heard himself hating the sound. Brake high. Brake high. The boy did not. The P-47 rolled, inverted like a man, putting his hat on backward to look bad, and then poured into the hole in the sky. Falk tipped his nose. Instinct yelled after. Doctrine hissed above. He kept above. He watched, jaw locked, as the German found compressibility's glass wall. The American came out fat with speed and cruel with options. Falk could not get there in time to change the physics, but he could change the story that would be told afterward. Eyes up, he said on the common frequency. He wins down. We win when he must climb with nothing in his pockets. Don't pay for a grave with dignity. The microphone clicked back 3 times, a new habit, code for herd. Then, because proof is a jealous god, the second act demanded Falk's life. 2 Mustangs slid at him from sun and contempt, their bellies flashing like fish in a river. He did what his muscles had learned in other lives, broke to make them overshoot, and then he did what the Thunderbolt had taught. He did not try to play the bore when these were spears. He refused a knife fight. He took them down, then refused to meet them down. He rolled and climbed across their noses, not into them bleeding speed into altitude, altitude into dogma. Their wings shook with the urge to follow. Their pilots were not idiots. They let him go. They had fortresses to keep. They were not paid to be vain either. In the corner of the fight, Falk saw a thing he had dreaded and rehearsed. A P-47 locked with a 190 in a slow, ugly carousel just above the treetops. The American trying will turn right out of a weight problem that did not love him. Falk pointed his Thunderbolt down and then sideways, showing himself to the American the way you show a dog the ball you want him to want. The P-47 took the bait, broke. The 190, dizzy with the joy of a predictable enemy, tightened for the shot that would make a story for later. Falk arrived out of plane and out of patience, hosed the space in front of the 190's prop with .50 that wrote hate letters in American cursive. The 190 flinched, as all living things do when surprised hard enough, and the American left low with his life and a bad story to tell about a German who had just saved him. The 190 went vertical to think about his sins. Falk let him. You cannot tutor everything in one class. He did not shoot to kill. His mission was not to erase, but to illustrate. When the fight dissolved under the long shadow of the returning fortresses, Falk came home with film in the belly and a doctrine hammered by fear into muscle. He taxied to the line. Men ran. Lerstner's face wore the look aerodrome officers get when something has gone either very wrong or surprisingly right, and they're trying to decide which flavor of paperwork they will eat. Kraus reached for the cowl as if the machine were a son arriving from sea. "Well?" Lerstner asked. Falk pulled off the mask, and the line it left on his face looked like a chalk mark a question might leave. "It works," he said simply. "We don't dive after the fist. We make it climb broke. We make it turn ashamed. We provoke patience instead of pride." "And you?" Kraus asked softly. "How are you?" "Lighter than I deserve," Fox said, and meant it. They watched the film that night in a darkened room that smelled the way paper smells when it is asked to weigh more than its weight. The projector clattered its soothing machine prayer. On the wall, small men and huge machines doing arithmetic with the only pencils the war gave them. The room exhaled at the right moments, when the compressibility tremble tried to write a man's name on stone, when the head-on threat scribbled a line of tracers across the sky like a red underlining. When the rescue came, a mechanic made a sound that was not a word and not quite a prayer. Lerstner stopped the film and left the last frame up. A Thunderbolt's wing at the corner of the picture, a forest below like stubble, a horizon that made a promise it could not keep. "This," he said, tapping the chalkboard, "is the war we have now, not the one we want. Avoid vanity is not cowardice. It is custody of your life, of your wingmen, of the last barrels in the last truck on the last road." He picked up the memo, looked at it as if it were an animal he might choose to adopt, and then added a line in his own hand. "Remember, the enemy also learns. Teach faster." That summer taught them as if time had been given a whip. The Thunderbolt did what it was born to do. The memo did what it was built to do. Losses did not vanish. This was not a fairy tale, but they sharpened into choices. Pilots came home who would have gone in. Some died correctly instead of heroically, and their friends loved them for the insult. Falk flew the P-47 until it felt like a dialect he could speak without an accent. He returned to the 109 and found it had gotten smaller. Not worse, but more specialized, more like a violin in a world that had become fond of brass. He carried both languages in his mouth. On days when no one asked for an example in the sky, he taught in the shack with sticks and chalk, making men draw their deaths in the air and then erase them. He dreamed, sometimes, of that parallel pass with the American Thunderbolt, the nod, the wag, the shrug that said the sky is not a flag, it is an element. He knew better than to say it aloud. He wrote it in the back of his notebook with the other things that were true but unhelpful. Kraus kept worrying the airplane the way a dog worries a bone he intends to love forever. He diagrammed the wastegate on brown paper with soft pencil and wrote annotations like love letters to future mechanics. He crafted a checklist in German that stole shamelessly from American brevity and pinned it to the ready room door. Men laughed and then used it. The first time a pilot came back and said, "I knew what to do because the words were where my hands were," Kraus allowed himself a smile that had been saving up. Lerstner, who had watched too many names become telegrams, pushed the memo outward like a man pushing a boat into a hard river. He fielded snorts from men who would never sign anything but their paybooks. He weathered praise like a man standing in a warm rain who knows the storm is not finished. One afternoon, after a sortie that had been more chase than fight, Fox stood at the end of the runway and listened to the wind slap the grass. He held the notebook he had ruined with weather and thought and oil. He wrote another line, because you cannot stop writing once you have started writing the war into smaller words. The aircraft is an opinion about how to live in the sky. He underlined it and then laughed at himself. Ernst came up with rags and the cheerful despair of a man who has never in his life had all the parts he wants. "Will we get another American?" he asked, nodding toward the P-47 as if it were a pet you might have to send back. "Maybe," Fox said. "Maybe not. We should," Ernst said. "Not because it is better, because it is useful. Usefulness is its own elegance." Kraus would have kissed him for that sentence. The war did what wars do. It consumed the careful and the careless in unfair ratios. Autumn found Reckland thinner. The pine trees clapped less often. The road out of the base learned the weight of trucks that carried things you could not fill back in. On a morning clogged with fog and dispatches, an envelope arrived addressed to Falk by name in a hand he did not recognize. Inside, a photograph. Two P-47s over a sea of clouds, one with a patch of paint on its right wing that looked like a birthmark. On the back, an English sentence, printed in block letters as carefully as a man can print when he does not want to be misunderstood. I saw you once. You were me for a second. Avoid vanity. Giel. Fox stood a long time next to the P-47 and let the wind try to take the picture out of his hand. It did not. He folded it into the notebook among the lines that had embarrassed him and fed him, both at once. He went to the hangar door where the light was better and wrote the last line he would allow himself on the subject. What changed everything wasn't a machine. It was admitting the machine was right. He closed the book, put on his cap, and went to brief boys about the mathematics of not dying. Outside, the Thunderbolt hummed a little as the afternoon warmed its skin. The day would ask again for examples, for film, for doctrine. He would go. He would point at the sky and say, "Here are the lines where you must not follow, and here are the places where you are allowed to be afraid in ways that keep you alive." War would end when it ended. The habits it had taught would not. Somewhere on some field, a mechanic would slide a radio into a rack and feel the click of a job that wanted to help him. Somewhere, in some classroom, a teacher would say the word energy and mean not just physics, but the ethics of keeping your wingman out of valley that eats pride. Somewhere in some museum, a child would stand under the barrel belly of a P-47 and ask why it was so big, and a tired docent would say, so the man inside could come home. Falk buttoned his tunic and walked into the noise of man. The sky, which had not read any memos, waited with its old, simple rules. He would ask us to speak a little more slowly today. He would ask their enemies to be reasonable. The only thing he could promise was that his fear would be disciplined by a sentence pinned to a board with a fork. Avoid vanity. The rest, as always, was weather.